Previously, on Chasing the Golden State Killer with Paul Holes, Paul took us inside one of the most unsettling developments in this case. The moment the East Area Rapist appeared to respond to public attention, change his approach, and for the first time, attack a woman in her home with a man present. Now, no one felt safe. In today's episode, Paul walks us through the phone calls, the threats, and the ways this offender continued to terrorize his victims long after he'd assaulted them.
Sacramento Sheriff's Office early on in the series recognized that the East Area Rapist was calling his victims after the attacks.
The calls were not random. They were yet another form of control, another way for the offender to remind his victims that he knew who they were and could get to them at any time.
She's attacked June of 1976 in Cordova Meadows, and on January 2nd, 1978, 18 months later, he calls her, and she was able to capture his voice.
For Paul, these details matter because they reveal so much about the mind of the East Area Rapist. He's cocky, he's insatiable, and he gets off on learning what creates the most fear.
This just really illustrates he's loving inflicting that type of fear.
Episode 5, Fear Me.
During the filming of one of the documentaries done on the unsolved Golden State Killer case, this production company ends up receiving some original documents, including handwritten notes from the original investigators up out of Sacramento. And this is when I learned that this one victim who had been attacked back in 1977, and at the time of her attack, she was employed by a local motel as a maid, kind of a housekeeper type. 5 years later, she's working at a Denny's in Rancho Cordova, and she receives a phone call from the East Area Rapist.
At work.
At work.
That's so wrong.
And so I believe that DeAngelo, because this is his stomping grounds, I believe he probably would go to that Denny's just as a routine customer, meet up with some buds, because he did have, male friends, and hang out there, and all of a sudden he sees one of his victims. And so whether he goes to a nearby payphone, who knows where he's calling from, but he calls her. And it's fairly explicit what he says, and it's pretty sexually graphic. So this is just demonstrating, again, I'm here to inflict fear.
It's so cruel. It's just so cruel.
Yeah. Sacramento Sheriff's Office early on in the series recognized that the East Area Rapist was calling his victims after the attacks. And so they went around, and for those victims that were willing, they provided those old-style tape recorders that would plug into the phone lines. And so the victims would have to manually push a record button to get the tape started so they could record the phone call. Multiple victims received calls from the East Area Rapist after they had these recording devices, but for one reason or another, they failed to capture the recording. And a common problem was, this recording onto cassette tapes, and they had failed to rewind the cassette tape. So when he calls, it's already at the end, and you're pushing that record button, and you can't get anything to happen, right?
Oh,
yeah, and I just picture every time your phone rings, you have this dread. Mm-hmm. And you go hit record and you maybe forget about it while you're talking for 15 minutes with your aunt.
Absolutely. And that was pretty typical. But we actually do have one of the phone calls recorded. And it's been out in the public domain for a long time. And this was a phone call made to that very first East Area Rapist victim. She's attacked June of 1976 in Cordova Meadows, and on January 2nd, 1978, 18 months later, he calls her, and she was able to capture his voice.
We actually have that recording, Paul. You brought it to us, so we'll just play that for you right here. It's pretty chilling. DeAngelo starts with heavy breathing, but it doesn't start right at the top of the call, so listeners, just be patient. It comes together.
His voice is not being expressed in this phone call because he's hissing, all right? So you can't determine anything about his voice, just like how the East Area Rapist is always talking through clenched teeth. In this recording, he is also altering his voice. And I experimented with that, where I did various types of, kind of breathy or hissing types of, talking. And I was like, I cannot tell that that's my voice.
No, you can't get any distinction of the quality of the person's voice that way. One of the things that really impressed me about that phone call that we just heard is that this victim actually stays on the line because, like I said, as you heard, there is no feedback from the caller for quite a few seconds. And so that she doesn't just go, well, nobody's here, and doesn't hang up. Although I'm guessing if you've been given this device because you've been a victim, you're like, maybe this is the call.
Right. Why isn't anybody talking?
Yeah.
So she hung on, and then you get the heavy breathing. And this is where there's a lot of background noise. And this is the one instance where I can say an online sleuth did an amazing job to help me realistically, because I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out the background noises.
Like, which side was the background noise on?
Which side it was on, and the hope was it was on his side, and it sounded like he was in an office or something. There were people talking in the background. And then ultimately, probably, consulting a TV guide, he figured out, this is the Lee Remick movie, and I forget the title of the movie, but found the exact location of the noises and verbal stuff that was in that movie, and it turned out the victim was the one that was actually had that movie on her TV. So I spent so much time, and it was all wasted.
No, not wasted. Hats off to the online sleuth, though.
Yeah.
That's good detectiving.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, but it also shows, there is a benefit to crowdsourcing some aspects of the investigation. And there are some of these online citizens who are very talented and have good intentions. But we also know in this world, there are people that are nut jobs, and they actually hurt the investigation or actually start contacting victims or contacting potential suspects. And it's like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's always alarming when people insert themselves.
And this is where a lot of my investigative thrust, which as of now, I would say was completely wrong, now that we know DeAngelo is the one. But I did not let it out in the public as to what I was doing, because I wanted to make sure, ultimately, I really focused in on the town Davis. And I did not want anybody to know out there in the online community that that's where my focus was at, because I didn't want them to start trampling and contaminating my witnesses or even the victims who still lived in the area.
Right.
The tail of that is big, because people, when they start getting contacted by non-law enforcement folks, even if it's a public defender's investigator, people start shutting down.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Start going, I'm not going to deal with this. I don't want to talk to anybody. And then law enforcement loses that contact.
So 4 weeks after that one recorded phone call, in February of 1978, we have a married couple, Katie and Brian Maggiore, who are out walking their dog 11 o'clock at night in the neighborhood immediately adjacent to Cordova Meadows. Ugh. Literally just west of it. In fact, the road that they start out on is technically probably in Cordova Meadows. So Brian is a military police officer, was known to have an aggressive personality. And I always say victimology is huge. You need to know your victims. And knowing just that about Brian is informative, because it appears that Brian and Katie end up seeing the East Area Rapist out prowling. And Brian gives chase. The cop in him, he's now going after the East Area Rapist because he sees him probably up at a house prowling. They run through a backyard of one house, and the rear fence had been blown down by a recent storm, so they were able to run into the rear neighbor's backyard. And it appears that the East Area Rapist comes up to a fence line, just like down in Visalia, and is like, enough is enough. Turns around, pulls a gun, shoots and kills Brian.
Oh, my God.
There's a teenage boy on the second floor. This is a neighborhood that actually had 2-story houses. Teenage boy hears early gunshots, looks out, and now he's seeing muzzle flashes as the East Area Rapist is shooting down at a prone or supine Brian Maggiore, killing him, right? Then sees East Area Rapist run around the back of the house and down the side, going out of sight, can no longer see the rapist, but hears Katie scream and then gunshot. And Katie ends up having basically a contact gunshot wound to the top of her head.
Oh, jeez.
East Area Rapist did not need to kill her. She wasn't a threat. Another teenage boy runs out the front of his house, that's right next to the house where the homicides occurred, and hears somebody climbing over the fence and looks, and now he's got the rapist running straight at him. Rapist sees this witness, turns around, and is last seen running east down the street, almost like towards the Cordova Meadows neighborhood. Don't know if he's purposely heading that direction or if he's just kind of getting away at this point.
It's interesting that DeAngelo doesn't shoot that second witness as he's hopped over the fence running toward the boy and then like, oh shit, and decides to, button hook and go the other way.
It is interesting, and there was some debate if the teenage boy saw him with his mask on or if the mask was up. And right now, I don't have clarity on that because after, this case was starting to go to trial, he was re-interviewed now as definitely an older guy. Not that old.
The teenage boy
The
was?
teenage boy, yes.
Any shell casings found at the scene?
No, so this was a revolver.
Maybe he hadn't reloaded. The last shot he's got in the revolver is the one he puts into the wife,
Katie, yeah.
Katie, and he's out of bullets.
Could be. Absolutely. Now, early on, there was some thought that this was not related to the East Area Rapist. However, next to Brian's body on the ground were pre-tied shoelaces, as he was intending to use these as binding material. And it's, the area where it's at. And we've taken a look at now Claude Snelling. A man came out and charged at DeAngelo. DeAngelo shot and killed him. Brian Maggiore, a man, comes charging at him. DeAngelo shoots and kills him.
Yeah.
You have basically the same kind of response.
Right.
The detail about the bindings being right next to Brian Maggiore, I'm thinking those are in the same pocket as his gun. And so when the hand goes in to pull out the gun, everything comes with it.
It could be.
Or you don't want to have those as your...
Get rid of it.
Yeah. That's why hitmen leave the gun on the body or in the nearby dumpster. You don't want to get caught with that down the road.
Growing up in the forensic lab and the CSI, of course, there's always discussion of strategies on how to get away with the crime. If you possess a gun that can't be traced back to you, you leave it behind.
Yeah.
Even today with DNA testing that we can do off of firearms, if you're absolutely confident nothing can be traced back to you, you do not want to take that with you.
Yeah.
Not to give anybody any tips.
Well, you just did.
I just want to point out the foot pursuit that Brian engages in here. Foot pursuits, especially at night, are very dangerous for law enforcement. Especially, you come around a corner, and I was taught very early in my career, when you come around a corner, or you're coming up to a corner, especially at night during a foot pursuit, slow down. Don't run to your death.
Sure.
You don't just blindly go around the corner, because I had coworkers who they were chasing were waiting in ambush. It's just tragic that it ends up like this. I mean, Brian was so close to being a hero.
Right. This is replicating Officer McGowan and the anthropology student, where they chase him up to a fence line, and then that's when DeAngelo goes, I'm done with this, and turns around. And that's what happened to Brian Maggiore. In this series, there is a case in which a father and son, the son is teenager, 17-ish, and they see a man, only the lower body out like the rear sliding door. They had curtains or something. They could only see there's shoes and pants walking by. And so they go outside, and the teenage boy ends up chasing who is believed to be the East Area Rapist. And East Area Rapist hops over a fence. So a teenage boy gets up onto the fence, boom, 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 gets shot in the abdomen multiple times because the East Area Rapist just waited for him to come up over the fence. And now it's another man chasing him.
Does that person die?
No, but with the number of shots that he took, he definitely had a lot of medical issues for his entire life.
Right.
It's more insight into Joseph DeAngelo, his awareness of the dynamics in a foot pursuit like that he knows. As this guy's coming up over the fence, he is completely vulnerable. Yeah. He can't grab anything other than the top of the fence.
Yeah, you're stuck.
So you're stuck, yeah. Reverse ambush.
Yeah, I'm struck with this Cordova Meadows area and how terrifying it must have been to live in that neighborhood during this series.
At the time of these cases, this was heavily populated by military personnel because right across the freeway is Mather Air Force Base. The back of these neighborhoods, the houses line the levee that backs up to the American River. They have vantage points. Some of these houses are sizable, but it definitely took a downturn over the decades in terms of now more lower income type of residents live in many of these locations, but not all. Everybody would think that this neighborhood would be a haven for safety because of the types of residents that were there. But this is the type of neighborhood that DeAngelo gravitated towards. Across the entire series, he isn't going into impoverished areas. He is going into solid middle class or middle upper class neighborhoods to commit his crimes. How I interpreted that was he blends in with that community. Before he was identified, it told me, well, the East Area Rapist, he's comfortable because he does blend in. He doesn't stand out versus, as I get more into the investigative aspects that I pursued early on, a lot of the suspects that were investigated were like these sex deviant transients, and you think, well, they're just driving around in some beater car. Well, they would stand out in this neighborhood, and there's likely going to be some sort of call into the cops about somebody that's suspicious looking.
Yeah, there's always something you can count on as a criminal is that the general public is largely very naive about these things. And so even in the middle of this, I was noticing in some of the newspaper articles where it's clear that we're, 24 into this series, but the reporting in these articles is suspect entered through an open window.
Yes.
Or through an unlocked back door. And so even with all of this, there's still that happens to other people, not me.
And that is very true. And it's interesting as, we move into what I consider phase 2 of the East Area Rapist cases, which is Modesto Davis. When I'm going through at the Davis Library, going through newspaper archives, it is now showing Davis residents going, oh shit, he's here. And there's a very compelling photo of a woman who is now stacking dishes and putting them by her rear slider door as an alarm system.
Wow.
Use it against him, right?
Yeah.
Does phase 2 start after the Maggiore?
Yes. So what ends up happening is now you have this double homicide of Katie and Brian Maggiore. He stops attacking in the Sacramento area, just like, after he shot Officer McGowan.
Snelling, McGowan. Yep. I'm bailing out of this area.
For sure. Okay, so now phase 1, Sacramento and Stockton is done. Maggiore's were the last case. It goes 4 months without a case. And then in June of 78, an East Area Rapist attack occurs all the way down in Modesto. Now, Modesto is 2 hours south of Sacramento, at least 3 hours south from Auburn, where we know DeAngelo was living at the time. So that's a significant distance to drive to commit an attack. And then 2 days after Modesto, he's up in the town of Davis, west of Sacramento. That's 110 driving miles. So this is one of the most interesting phases from a geographic standpoint. A couple weeks go by, and then June 23rd, 1978, he's back down attacking a couple in Modesto. And then within 24 hours, he's back up in Davis attacking a couple. He's toggling back and forth between Modesto and Davis. And some of the debate is, well, is he doing that because now He's trying to throw law enforcement off. He wants to continue the attacks. He just killed a couple, and now he's attacking a distance away with Modesto from Sacramento. But Davis is right next to Sacramento. It's just across the causeway. So it's not like he's going a great distance away. Davis PD, of course, is going to be aware because they're so close geographically. And then another almost couple weeks go by, and he has a third attack on a single female whose husband was estranged and wasn't in the house at the time.
It's interesting looking at the distance that he's going in between these attacks. I think about it from a law enforcement standpoint. If I'm trying to predict and prevent the next one, how do you do that? You're like, this guy's 2 counties away at sometimes,
right,
and I got to predict the night, the location, and the time.
No, absolutely. And, there was other offenders that were, of course, they're committing attacks on all sorts of different jurisdictions.
Yep.
Obviously, Golden State Killer series is the extreme example of that. And not so much from a geographic spread, because you have offenders that attack all the way across countries or internationally, but his attacks, he is spreading them all over California. So part of the interesting aspect of this toggle between Modesto and Davis attacks, and especially the geographic distance as well as the back-to-back nature of these two sets of attacks, was in the second Modesto attack. After the newspaper article came out about that attack occurring in Modesto, a Modesto cab driver called law enforcement and said, I know where that location is. I picked up this guy, the strange man from the Modesto airport, and he told me to drive up to this intersection just south of where that attack occurred. And he said that guy was carrying a duffel bag and was walking across a vacant lot to the location where the victims were attacked, and those houses were actively under construction at the time.
Wow.
So I was like, well, was that the East Area Rapist, and did he arrive by an airplane? And then that second Davis attack, which was just 24 hours after that Modesto airport witness, a couple is attacked, and it's in a world-famous development, Village Homes, and the developer of that, Michael Corbett, was a former Eagle Scout and prided himself on his ability to track, right? And he had a shoe impression in his sand pit that he had raked, and this was a fresh shoe print, and it matched the shoe impressions in the victim's yard. So he tracks those shoe impressions to the East Area Rapist. And where does that lead to? The UC Davis Airport.
Oh, wow.
So I have back-to-back cases, 110 driving miles apart, with witnesses indicating the East Area Rapist had an association with airports.
I truly believe that it's very intentional.
Yep.
These attacks are near an airport. It's misdirection. Again, I truly believe that. He's so calculating.
Sure.
That I think there's intent and purpose in everything he does.
I agree. It's just when I was, going through this, it was like, well, what does that tell me about my offender? And again, my investigative thrust was looking at real estate developers. Well, I was talking to real estate developers back in the day, and some of them did have their own private planes.
Is Davis a private airport? It's not a commercial airport?
This is the UC Davis, the college airport.
Oh.
And I talked to the staff that were there current day, and I was asking, hey, do you have any archives of what planes had landed back in 1978? And they, no, sir. Because I don't know this world at all, but they told me, after staff leaves, you could have like a little Cessna plane land, tie down, and take off. While we're gone, we would have no idea it was ever there. There was nothing. Oh. It was like somebody just, pulling into a grocery store parking lot, and I was stunned. I thought there would be more records for airplanes. Well, no, I guess not. So this is where I spent a lot of time, and especially with the real estate developers and people that had the resources to utilize planes. And then once DeAngelo was identified, I was like, well, what is this? What are these airport connections? I don't know.
Right. We might not have any idea what DeAngelo was doing at those airports, but we definitely know he was attacking homes that were close by to those airports.
Yeah, that's true. I can't say anything about whether he flew in and flew out, or maybe he parked his car down by the airport. But I'm absolutely confident. I actually met up with that developer, and I had him take me along the path that he tracked.
The Eagle Scout guy.
The Eagle Scout guy, and it's stunning when you see what it is. And he has a distinct memory of it, and part of the reason for the distinct memory is he was on a bike with his son. He'd get off, take a look at the shoe impressions, and his son ended up like getting his foot caught in the spokes, kind of like riding on the rear seat of the bike. And so he has this distinct memory that just increases the veracity of what he is showing me. But everything he showed me is identical to what he reported back in 1978.
I was going to say, that's a really squared away witness.
Yeah.
Like when you can tie it to another event that you go, well, this is contemporaneous with this little incident with my son and the bike spokes. Like in circumstantial cases, especially like in the child sexual abuse cases, we use those a lot. As this was a contemporaneous disclosure, and this is why it's compelling, is the memories tied to it. When you said that, I was like, that's really compelling stuff.
Yeah. And, the other thing about this tracking is some of the path that the East Area Rapist took to get down to the airport area, there is some hard surfaces that he's crossing. So, of course, when you're walking on, let's say, a sidewalk or asphalt, you're not leaving the shoe impressions. And so the tracker, he's having to kind of span that and then look for and refine the trail. But the path that the East Area Rapist took, well, that is a dirt path that is lined with olive trees. And so, in essence, you have uninterrupted surface in which the Eagle Scout was able to track it all the way down. So that just further increases the veracity of what he observed.
And that's hundreds of yards without having to worry about a car driving up on you.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So DeAngelo potentially is leaving his shoe prints in this dirt alley that has olive trees.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So a notable attack was the third attack up in Davis, and that was in July of 1978. And this is a woman who had some small children in the house, and she was very, very security conscious. All the windows were locked, all the doors were locked. She had wood dowels placed in all the windows. And during this attack, even as security conscious as she was, the East Area Rapist was able to get in and attack her. And I'll explain how he did that in a second. But this attack is notable because during the sexual assault, while he's literally raping this woman, the East Area Rapist is sobbing and saying, "I hate you, Bonnie," over and over again. So we always knew that the offender had a woman named Bonnie that was significant. Now, was that mom? Was that a wife, a girlfriend, a past lover? Don't know, right? But that becomes significant when DeAngelo is identified. And I'll walk through how that ends up becoming significant once we get to that point. The Visalia Ransacker was not what I consider a good burglar. He struggled to get into some of the houses. He did not show any type of advanced techniques to do that. And of course, he's seen by all sorts of people. You see how DeAngelo learned in terms of, I need to do things better to continue being a predator, such as changing his appearance, altering his voice, using a ski mask all the time, etc. Well, here, this is a demonstration of how DeAngelo also improved his skills to break into houses. So even though this woman had her house tightly locked up, DeAngelo was able to punch a dime-sized hole in her window pane while she was asleep and undo the window latch, and then using some sort of tool, possibly even like a coat hanger, opened up coat hanger, and fished the wood dowel out of the track and then entered the house and sexually assaulted this woman.
Ugh. It just is like the definition of no good deed goes unpunished. She's trying to take care of herself, her family, and she's...
You do everything right.
And still...
Yeah.
I had processed a lot of burglary cases. I had never seen somebody employ that technique. So I end up going to a window manufacturing company in South Sacramento, and I talked to several of the male employees, older male employees. Well, it turns out they were working at that company back in the 1970s. They're glazers. And so I'm just here, I've got my, law enforcement polo shirt on. I obviously look law enforcement. And, I say, well, I've got this happening. I got this guy punching a dime-sized hole. And they're going, no way. He's not doing that. And they start talking about the type of sheet glass that was being used in windows during the 1950s through the 1970s and saying that you can't do that. I was like, hold on.
Because it would shatter the entire window,
right? So I went out to my car and I come back and I show him a picture. And this is a picture of another case in which he punched a hole in this window, and it's a dime-sized hole. And they look at that, and then they start collaborating, and they're going, oh, I can see what he's doing. If he uses a screwdriver right here and presses a certain way, so they started, because of their expertise, started kind of figuring out how this could occur. But they told me, they go, he's practiced this. He runs such a risk of just shattering that entire window. To do this takes skill. And this is where it's like, okay, so DeAngelo has practiced this. He has recognized he needed to get better at breaking into houses. He may have been taught this during burglary school. Right?
That's what I was thinking is law enforcement sometimes brings in old practitioners. Mm-hmm. They're like, this is how I did this.
So they hire criminals to help them show me how you did it.
Yeah, and I've never been trained by a criminal, but there's plenty of people that we've brought in that have access to, or Dan. Talk to lots of burglars. How'd you do this? Not why'd you do it. It's like the how.
Right.
How'd you do this? I'm trying to figure this out so I don't get my ass kicked on the next one. And Dan has some great stories about a keyless entry guy that is very similar to Joseph DeAngelo and the resourcefulness of being able to go, I'm going in there no matter what. I'm going in there tonight.
Yeah, for our listeners, the burglar that Dan and Dave are talking about is the subject of a case that Dan gave us on Small Town Dicks in season 3 called Keyless Entry. It's a great episode, definitely worth a re-listen.
Yeah, 40-something burglaries in 100 days.
Wow.
And prolific across all the jurisdictions in my area. And he was so impressed with himself that he actually, at the time of his arrest, was in possession of a book that he had begun writing about how to make your house
secure. Oh, wow. Okay. This is illustrative about when you are an intelligent offender, you are going to learn things in order to be able to commit your crimes. And you hear how the East Area Rapist was using a flashlight to blind, comes in one instance with the gun and padded baton, stop or I'll shoot. There's obvious law enforcement overtures to some of the tactics that DeAngelo was doing. And so in hindsight, you go, well, it stands out. But my argument all along was, yeah, but I'm dealing with an intelligent offender. If I were to become a serial predator, I'm going to do these same types of things. There's a reason why law enforcement and the military employ these tactics, right? So I'm going to learn those things in order to commit the crimes.
Right.
Now, we're moving into what I call phase 3 of the East Area Rapist cases. At this point, DeAngelo began attacking in Concord. The very first attack that occurred down in Concord, and this is a case, as I mentioned, where I showed the glaziers the hole in the window that he punched. In this particular case, though, his plan A was not to go through that window. His plan A was to go through a side garage door. So he cuts a part of the external wood next to the door handle to manipulate the inner aspects of this door handle in order to be able to open it. However, the victims had a security bar behind that door, so he couldn't open that door. And the fact that he attempted that tells me, well, he hasn't been inside that house, or at least not into the garage, didn't know a security bar was in place.
But also, The fact that he had a plan to get in that side door and he can't, he doesn't, as Dave said earlier, run away and go, this isn't the house, this isn't the night.
No, and this is one of the points that I want to make is that, of course, he's got nerves. He may be confronted by something that could actually hurt him as he goes inside this house. He's got excitement. He's got a lot of adrenaline flowing, and he's failing at this first attempt. Well, he's such a cool and collected customer. He just walks around to the front of the house and punches the hole in the window, opens up that window, climbs in, and then reaches back down and puts the window screen back on and closes the window as if nothing had occurred. So people walking by or driving by, because the front of this house is facing a prime arterial road, they would have no idea there was something amiss.
Yeah, and there's this compulsion element that I'm well aware of. Sex offenders, when they set their mind to getting their hands on a victim, very, very little will distract them from doing that. And so there's this compulsion that outweighs your own survivability factors and all those things that I have to do this.
Sure. And that's where there's always this risk assessment where their compulsion is so strong that they're willing to go through a higher level of risk in order to satisfy what they're after. It's only once that risk has gotten so high that they will push away before carrying out the attack, as in, oh shit, the law enforcement officer is walking around the corner. I better get the hell out of here.
Yeah, or Claude Snelling surprised me, or Officer McGowan, or Maggiore is, well, I can't do this anymore right here. I have to go somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
So this very first Concord attack, this is the one case in which he steals the most from the victims across the entire series. He steals 14 sets of china and the silverware, and he steals an alarm clock and other items. And so the original investigators are looking at the types of items that he's stealing, and they're going, oh, he's setting up house. Oh. And so they believed he had moved down into the East Bay. And to this day, I don't know if the family china that DeAngelos were using was from this burglary.
That is interesting, but it also leads me to believe that in that attack, he would have parked very close by.
Yeah, and that's a lot of stuff to take out.
Right. So basically, what's becoming abundantly clear is that DeAngelo is getting better and better at committing his crimes.
Just like anybody who wants to excel in their career, he wanted to excel at his criminality. And part of the complexity of this case, I'm going to be talking about homicides. And when you have a homicide, you have to interpret what happened because you don't have living victims to tell you what happened. You also don't have the victims telling you what the offender said to them. So as the East Area Rapist, we have all these living victims. And so there's statements that the rapist told these victims that, of course, they now tell law enforcement. That ends up in the case file. There's some repeated patterns in what the East Area Rapist would tell the victims. Some of it was where he comes in, and in like the 6th case, he's saying, you better have more money because I need a fix.
Oh, like he's a drug addict.
Exactly. Or in the 17th case, I need some pills. Where's your codeine? I need them.
Is there any indication that DeAngelo was a drug user?
No, and I'll get to that.
Okay.
And this is a repeated type of statement where he's trying to portray to the victims that he's doing this because he needs food and money, as if he is this transient, and he's trying to maintain his addiction by committing, in essence, a robbery. And so the early investigation was really now looking at suspects that sort of fit this type of profile. And oftentimes investigators were focusing in on like teenage boys or very young men, thinking that that fit this type of offender.
What you're saying is DeAngelo is laying down these details as a look over here tactic.
Yes. This was not recognized early on in the investigation. And I even at the beginning, when I really got into the investigation versus just the forensic side of this case, I was also paying attention to these statements. But after I got to a certain point and I eliminated somebody who I was absolutely sure was the East Area Rapist, and he kind of fit this type of offender. I'll use the term like the troll under the bridge.
Right.
Somebody who's popping up out of, the darkness, committing the crime, stealing money, eating the victim's food, raping the woman, and then moving on and, finds the next bridge to lay under until he pops up again. When I eliminated that suspect, and I'll talk about that investigation in a little bit, I sat back and go, where did I go wrong? And one of the things that I did is through the 50 Northern California East Area Rapist cases, I took every single statement out of every case file and put them in a spreadsheet in chronological order. Oh. And then that all of a sudden became critical to understanding what was going on. I start seeing what is contradiction with what the East Area Rapist was saying to the victims. As an example, and this one is a little bit more subtle one, the very first Modesto attack, and this is, in June of 1978, he comes in and he steals $1,500 in cash. They had a laundry business, and so they would bring their business proceeds home at night. Now, this is $1,500 in cash in 1978.
So that's a hunk of money.
That's a lot of money back then. 2 days later, he's up in Davis attacking a college girl, and he tells her, I need food and money. Well, he doesn't need the money. He just got $1,500 in cash 2 days before.
Right.
I was like, what's going on here? Now, there is an MO aspect. You go in, let's say, and you're being perceived by the victim that you're there to sexually assault, and now you're making this statement to put the victim's mind at ease so she's less resistant. But there's also an aspect of what I call verbal staging. And this is illustrated with some other statements that are much more objective, where you can see, oh, hold on here. Okay, I now know what you're doing. So as an example, in the 16th attack, which is in April of 77, he tells that couple, lay still or I'll kill you like I did some people in Bakersfield. So he is now saying, I have killed.
Right.
And I've killed all the way down in Bakersfield, which is, just north of Los Angeles over the Grapevine, right?
Right.
I am a killer. You better listen to me. And I come up out of basically Southern California. But then for the Italian couple, somewhat, controversial, if you will, but the Italian male that supposedly stood up in the town hall meeting
and said he's never attacked with the man in the house.
That's right. And this is just 6 weeks after he said, I've killed down in Bakersfield. He tells that Italian couple that I've never killed before, but I'm going to kill now. So what is it? Right. 6 weeks ago, you just told somebody that you're a killer.
Yeah.
And now you're saying you've never killed before. This is contradiction. When you see contradiction, whether it be at a crime scene or you have these types of verbal statements that are contradicting each other that the offender is stating, you have to stop and evaluate. Why is the offender contradicting himself?
DeAngelo demonstrates clear knowledge of police procedures. And DeAngelo is going to know how reports are routed through the agency. He's going to know what pertinent information is going to be put in a police report. So he knows these statements are going to be very well documented. And it's misdirection. And it's him showing, hey, I know how my patrol guys and my detectives are going to work this. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make myself look like the troll under the bridge. So those guys are looking in areas where you'd normally see transients or people that don't have a home, don't have a job. So he understands how the police are going to read these reports and where they're going to allocate resources.
Absolutely. And as an example, he was making these statements about, I need food and money, or I need my drugs, I need, money for my fix. Like in one case, he tells the victims, I'm going to take you down to my camp on the American River. Well, this is where there's encampments of homeless people. So he's seeding information into the victims that he knows that is going to go to the investigation, but it's pushing the investigation away from who he is. Anytime somebody stages, whether it be staging a crime scene, you stage it to look like a suicide when in actuality the offender shot and killed his wife, right?
Right.
When an offender does staging, in their mind, they know naturally, I'm going to be perceived as a suspect. And so I need to push the investigation away from looking at me. And with DeAngelo, he understands that. And so he is planting this false information about himself. Original investigators are now following leads based on these types of statements. And just a couple of other, quick examples. He repeatedly, throughout the cases up in Northern California, told the victims something to the effect, don't tell them you saw my van parked out front. He's constantly referring to, using a van. Do you think he used a van?
No, of course not.
No. And what's the opposite of a van?
A motorcycle?
A motorcycle. And we know now today DeAngelo is very proficient at riding motorcycles. So I do believe DeAngelo, in some of the cases, got to the victim's house utilizing a motorcycle. And imagine it's a lot easier to hide a motorcycle in a neighborhood than it is a car or a van. Some things you don't know if he's misdirecting or not. As an example, there was always a question, was the East Area Rapist in the military? With some of the tactics he was employing, there was even a thought that this guy is a highly trained special forces type of guy. And in one case, the East Area Rapist tells the victims, when I was in the Army, or I was discharged from the Army, and once I'm starting to recognize he's doing this verbal staging, the opposite of that is, well, he wasn't in the military. Well, when we identify DeAngelo, well, he was in the military, but he was in the Navy. And what's the biggest rivalry in the military? Army versus Navy.
Right.
He's trying to put it on his rivals in the military.
The opposite.
The opposite.
I think one of the things probably that was so difficult to wrap your head around as an investigator is that somebody would be this persistent and evolving, right? Like 50 sexual assaults is a huge number. And so I just think for people who are decent, you just how is this possible that somebody would be so dedicated to honing a skill so malevolent?
Well, this is where, just like Dave's caseload.
Right. Sex crimes and child abuse.
This is where now you have a crime, and the motivation for the crime is fundamentally sexual gratification. So this is tied to one of the most powerful drives that humans have. So there's a compulsion there. DeAngelo is not wanting to stop this because he is getting sexual gratification out of these crimes. And he is demonstrating over the course of so many attacks that he is willing to evolve to continue committing these crimes and to get better at being able to commit the crimes. Now, I will say that as the Northern California series progressed into phase 3, the East Bay, that there was indicators that DeAngelo was struggling with what he was doing.
Really?
Yes. And even earlier, up in Sacramento, one of the behaviors, which is a fascinating behavior, is that after the sexual assault, the victims would report at times it sounded like he was sobbing and he's crying, and he would be kind of making statements like, she's making me do this. Is this part of the verbal staging, or is this an actual real behavior? He's really struggling. He's going, you piece of shit, I can't believe I just did this type of thing. And to this day, I don't think we can conclusively answer that. However, like when DeAngelo was brought in for the interview and left alone, he would talk to himself. And neighbors would hear Joe out in the backyard talking to himself.
Wow.
And so that's just something that DeAngelo was doing and is consistent with, once he kind of gets that release from the sexual assault, now during that kind of the refractory period, now the real inner part of him is being expressed verbally as he's satisfied that compulsion and then is now going, what did I just do? Why am I continuing to do this? And I do believe that he kind of struggled with that. And in part, that is leading towards why he didn't continue to commit these types of crimes up until the day he was arrested. And possibly even is the reason why he's not willing to seek any attention for being the Golden State Killer.
Right.
Kind of getting back to this verbal staging in the case where the young woman was doing laundry at her parents' house, victim of opportunity.
Right. You mentioned her briefly in episode 3, where DeAngelo just spotted this victim out and about and decided she would be his next target.
Yes, and when he goes in and he's talking to her, at one point she's trying to say, well, my husband is going to come here. And he's like, well, where's your husband at? And she says, well, he's in Roseville, which is a city right next to Sacramento. And East Area Rapist is like, well, where's Roseville? As if he doesn't know the area. Mm-hmm. Well, once DeAngelo is identified, DeAngelo was a Roseville PD intern.
Oh, my God.
So I'm not going to go into a lot of details with the attacks that occurred in Phase 3 in the East Bay. In essence, we have roughly 12 attacks that occur from Concord area in Contra Costa County all the way down to San Jose. And these attacks generally follow the I-680 freeway, as if he's just driving up and down the freeway and pulling off into a neighborhood and attacking. Some of these neighborhoods are a distance away from the freeway, and he could have found something closer to the freeway. So, of course, I pay attention. Why is he driving 5 miles away from the freeway to get to that particular neighborhood? And consistently, there was active construction going on in those areas, which also kind of supported my investigative tact of, I think I'm dealing with somebody in the real estate development world. However, as I mentioned, the very first attack in the East Bay where he, the 14 sets of china and everything else. He's moving into the area, but evaluating the linear pattern of the attacks following this freeway, he is not showing the familiarity of the area like he did up in Sacramento, where he's crisscrossing the entire East area of Sacramento. So when I'm evaluating this, I'm going, he's not in the East Bay. He's not living in the East Bay. He's coming probably from the Sacramento area. Now we know, no, DeAngelo is coming all the way from Auburn and going all the way down to San Jose, like a 4.5, 5 hour drive to commit attacks. Now, is he purposely doing that, or is there something that is drawing him all the way down there? In that very first Concord attack, during the search, they find a badge, a flat badge, something that would be in a wallet. And it's like a 6-star badge.
It looks like a sheriff's badge, kind of?
It looks like a police officer's badge, but typically that's branded with the agency.
Yes.
This one was a badge that determined was more consistent with being from a security guard.
Oh.
And after DeAngelo was arrested, I had an old copper who was working law enforcement back in the 70s message me and saying, Paul, we were paid so poor back in the day, we were all moonlighting. And a frequent job we were taking was to be security on construction sites.
Oh, my goodness.
And construction sites, residents aren't coming at random hours. There's all kinds of machinery and trucks and dumpsters. There's all kinds of stuff out there that you could hide your little motorcycle behind or whatever and walk around a neighborhood like that. The police probably aren't doing patrol checks out there.
Even in Sacramento, I was starting to take a look, where the attacks were occurring. And, there was a fair amount of brand new construction going on in those areas. And whether or not he's working security in the Sacramento area on construction sites, I can't say. And to this day, we don't know if he had a security guard job. He's never told us that. And nobody has come forward saying, oh, I remember Joe, he was, part of my company and so I don't know. One of the things that was a miss on my part is I kind of dismissed that badge found in the yard, going, the East Area Rapist never posed as an officer. So I thought, that may just be a coincidental thing that was found, completely unrelated to the crime. Now I believe that was DeAngelo's badge that he inadvertently dropped.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In one of the cases in the East Bay that I think is notable, just because I developed a very strong relationship with the female victim, and this is a case in San Ramon. In this particular case, it's a prototypical attack on a couple. There was a very, very young boy in the house at the same time, but no interactions with the child. But in this particular case, DeAngelo tells the woman, "I've seen you at the lake." And she had relatively recently gone to a lake and was a big water skier. So, of course, she's freaking out. How does he know me, etc. But out in the driveway is a boat. And so you can imagine he's seeing this boat, and now he is just putting two and two together about the victimology and utilizing that against the victim. So this East Bay phase of the Northern California East Area Rapist attacks, basically spanned from October of 78 to July of 79. The very last case in Northern California was a case in Danville, California, where the male victim is in bed, his wife is in bed with him. Male victim is a notoriously light sleeper, like somebody like me. And he just gets a sense something's amiss, and he opens his eyes and sees a man inside the bedroom pulling down a ski mask over his face. Well, this man gets up and goes nose to nose with the East Area Rapist. "What the fuck are you doing in here? Get the fuck out." He literally is just screaming at this guy. The East Area Rapist has got a ski mask that he just put on, and he's wearing sort of a weird windbreaker-style jacket that is completely snapped up. The male victim remembers some sort of emblem, like on the left breast area, and of course it's like, well, what did that say? They put him under hypnosis, the whole 9 yards to try to get him to recollect what that was. But while the male victim is confronting the East Area Rapist, the wife gets up and runs out of the house. Now, the East Area Rapist has lost control. And as the rapist is standing there, he's looking at this man, and he's just sitting there blinking. And then he runs out. The East Area Rapist runs out, and then the male victim runs out. And boom, no more Northern California attacks after this one in July of 1979.
Interesting.
It's these significant events during his attacks that cause him to pack up and move on.
Yes, and these attacks do continue. It's just that now they continue down in Southern California. And of course, being so far away, authorities from both ends of the state have no idea that these other attacks that occur after July of 79 are related to the Northern California cases.
I look at it from even modern perspective. If we had the same set of facts and circumstances with this, it would take a while for Southern California and Northern California to agree, hey, we think we got the same guy.
Right.
Now you go back 40 years, 50 years, and the information didn't flow that way.
Coming up on Chasing the Golden State Killer with Paul Holes. The East Area Rapist leaves Northern California, but the crimes don't stop. 3 months later in Southern California, a familiar pattern appears. It's in a place where investigators have no reason to think that the crimes they're seeing might be connected to a prior investigation that every local community in Sacramento is familiar with.
So 3 months after the East Area Rapist is confronted by that man up in Northern California, he's now down in Goleta, the Santa Barbara area, committing an identical style attack. Here now we have a case that is identical to the Northern California East Area Rapist attacks on couples, yet Santa Barbara authorities have no idea that there's a series up in Northern California.
That's coming up on Chasing the Golden State Killer with Paul Holes. Small Town Dicks presents Chasing the Golden State Killer with Paul Holes is an Audio 99 production. It's written by Paul Holes and features Detective Dan, Detective Dave, and me, Yeardley Smith. The series is produced by Jessica Halstead and Monica Scott, executive produced by Ben Cornwell and me, edited by Katie McMurrin and Soren Bajan, with additional editing by Christina Bracamontes. Sound supervision by Logan Heftel, design and social media by Andrew Poke. The theme music is composed by Logan Heftel. If you'd like to support the making of this podcast, please go to smalltowndicks.com/superfam and hit that little join button. Also, you can stream all episodes at smalltowndicks.com/Golden State Killer. From all of us at Audio 99, thank you for listening.